I don't know. It's different because a lot of this stuff moved with election cycles. Think about like the American psychology within the war on terror paradigm, and then when Obama comes to power, it kind of just gets very quickly between 2000 and really 2007 and 2008. It just goes away really quick. If you remember, even in 2005, 2006, there were a lot of people who still supported things like the war in Iraq. And by the time you got to 2008, those people would swear blind they never supported it because it became culturally unpalatable and
Mm.
unpopular. There was a very, very rapid change in people's mindsets when it came to the kind of the war on terror footing. And I
Mm.
always think back to that. I think back to the way that we kind of came into, as it were, woke paradigm. Suddenly, people stopped talking about CIA torturing black sites. They were suddenly talking about gay marriage now, and that
Mm.
dominated the conversation to an extreme degree. And I also think a lot of the security state were relieved by that. It really did give them a bit of a holiday when the culture war became the dominant paradigm, rather than a lot of America, even if the leftists were doing it slightly incompetently, turning around and going, "Wait a minute, why is America torturing people now? What's
Yeah.
going on?" And they just went, people, we have gay marriage now.
Yeah.
Hey.
I think that it's very possible that that might have been a like deliberate like look over here jangling the keys. But I think maybe with this whole thing, the main difference between your and my position might just be that you're seeing it as a continuous project by the same group of people. And I'm seeing it as people in power who don't care about any particular beliefs, simply amplifying whatever cause that does naturally spring up is useful to them, but never really having control, always just trying to take advantage in the moment of whatever they can see.
It's both. To be fair, it is both. A lot of it, and to a degree, it doesn't matter. What they will do is they will sometimes reach down and take a tiny movement, a
Yeah,
tiny
I think
idea,
that's what
and
the social
elevate it.
justice thing was in the form they took it at the
Yes,
time.
there's everybody says everything. There's all the activism under the sun exists. You know, there's those weird direct action people who want to save the badgers, yet they don't get the same headlines as someone like
Mm.
Just Stop Oil does. And it's that kind of thing. You can reach down and you can find any group of wackos that you want in the population, and you can pick them up and you can go, you see, this is our project now. And I always describe them as they're the herders of chaos, really. They are. They don't have a high degree of control. I agree with you.
Mm.
But what they do have control over is the framing of events. They don't have control over events themselves. They control the way it's framed through their high degree of control over things like the media, and they're increasing control over things like the internet. And that is their power. Their power is not in controlling events, it is in framing events. And I think that's
Mm.
quite an important distinction.
Fair enough. I am seeing movements of society which are a little bigger than that zoomed in scale, which imply that the structures they need to do that are becoming obsolete as well. Not just the format of the press, but the entire notion of the press. That opinion formers may not need to be big single groups, corporations, that independent opinion formers may be becoming a more ubiquitous phenomenon, and that the only reason that they're not going as fast is because of suppression from corporations who are desperately trying to hold on to that power. That the paradigms are shifting enough that even if what you're saying is true, it probably won't be for much longer.
Oh, hugely. The evidence I find is that the establishment, if you look at the security state and the documents they publish, they're most afraid of people like you, or people who are independent content creators who are able to say what they want on different platforms and are not beholden to anybody. They're very afraid of that. That's what things like the Online Safety Act are about. That's
Mm.
why we have all this kind of creeping digital panopticon, is because people have been turned off by realizing that the news media itself is just propaganda. It is just the framing of the people who are in power. And that naturally just wears people down over time. They tune it out. And so you have to, they moved it to peer groups. That's what they talk about, the peer group news effect and things like that. And that really, it may be hopefully that people are disengaging for some of this framework, and really that some of the kind of effects of everything breaking down, really, everything at the moment, as you've probably seen, is just degrading in quite an alarming way. And the media is one of those things that's degrading as well. So it might just be that their control over the framing, as it were, may also be coming to an end in certain, which I would say is entirely plausible, as they slowly just lose all of their competent people because they're not
Yeah.
renewing themselves. They're simply
Exactly,
they're a giant incestuous group of people, as we see. It's a big club. You're not in it, but no one clever's in it either, and that's kind of a problem for them.
Mm. Okay. All right. Now that I've heard you actually explain your position, I see what you're saying. It's not as different from my position as I thought it was, and we agree on large parts of it. I think it's in many ways a different way of saying what I was saying with a few new ideas. But yeah, I think there's a possibility they will try that, but I'm not sure they even can pivot at this point. We'll see. The Israel thing, it is strange because it cuts orthogonal, like perpendicular to the cut in politics they had already had. And I did see the idea proposed that it's just a way of creating more arbitrary division, no matter whether they're also dividing their own pawns, which they are. They don't care about that. It's not about one side or the other. It's just about creating divisions, creating new ways for people to fight each other. And that may be the start of an attempt to do that.
I don't know if it's intentional or not, but if you look at that, what happens is, you're right, it does cut orthogonally. It cuts different. It cuts completely in a perpendicular direction. And what does that do? That takes the energy out of all the movements that relied on the previous paradigm. It really it's taken the wind out of the sails of much of the activist left, because they're running around going, oh shit, everyone's seeing us waving Palestinian flags in very inappropriate places, and people don't like us. And some of the people who are like the weird Israeli neocons, and well, we look bad also, because we, things are divided across lots of different axes, and certain parts of the right don't agree with us anymore that agreed with us previously, and oh dear. But really, what it does sow a lot of chaos. And you're right, it does divide people in a different way. And I believe I don't believe everybody knows that it, but there are very, very clever people who actually write documents about these kind of things. There's literature out there in which they talk about how to react to the left and react to the right, and they propose different strategies. They do war game these things behind the scenes to quite an extreme degree, and even slightly in public. Some of the stuff I've seen just written openly from like 10, 15 years ago is alarming. There's certain people who talk about as a leftist that it's like, oh, okay, what if we just adopt all the talking points of the right? We say we're going to do them, and when we get into power, we'll just not do them. We'll just fart around, we'll waste our time, and we'll discredit the people who have those ideas by pretending those ideas aren't viable. And by adopting them and failing to do them, we will diffuse those ideas. There's a document out there called Right Reaction or Right Response by a guy called Matt Goodwin, which literally says that in it. And I was amazed by it when I saw it.
I don't think that's actually particularly effective these days. I think people are getting sick of that and actually doing something about it. Like, the things you're saying would be a lot easier to be concerned about if I had not seen a movement forming to deal with it. One that I think is not just focused on current issues, but focused on the source of them as well. And the big heads at the top of it are talking directly about the source. But hey, maybe that's a lot of presentism. Maybe it won't be as successful as I hope. But I am already seeing improvement.
I'm up. The thing is, people tell me black, but I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic that there are people who will see through this. The problem is that the majority of people simply repeat the framing that's given to them. They repeat what is told to them. It's like the lockdowns. A lot of people now will deny that they supported the lockdowns when you can scroll back in their social media and find rabid posts about incarcerating unvaccinated people.
Yeah, indeed. I think a lot of this is like, I think the sort of core of what you're saying, and I agree, is that the ability to dictate the news, the sort of info disseminators of a society, is an incredibly overpowered ability. And perhaps a lot of the things that our opponent are doing with the wargaming, as you're talking about, they're actually idiots. Their wargaming efforts are stupid. I mean, the thing you suggested about adopting the ideas and putting them into, and then just not doing them, doesn't seem to me like it would be a good long-term strategy. Maybe they are idiots, and the only reason they think they're doing well is because they already have this massive assumed power granted to them by by whatever objective you care to mention, the most powerful societies in human history. That's all
they've already done that, though.
And that all it's going to take is changing that paradigm.
Strategy. They have put that strategy into practice. But if you look at Maloney, though, they advertised Maloney as a fascist, and then she came in and acted like a middle-of-the-road neoliberal. And that is something that, you're right, it will not work long-term, but they're still doing it because in some ways they're desperate. And in the short term, that will work. if you go, look, Maloney, she's a fascist. She has all these fascist ties. Look how fascist she is.
Mm.
And then she gets into power and she's talking about NATO. She's talking about staying in the EU. She's not talking about
Yeah.
any of the things that they tried to big her up for. It's
Yeah.
just, it's so odd to me that they basically got someone who's ostensibly a neoliberal, it's, what is it, like fascist in the streets, neoliberal in the sheets kind of thing, in that she
Well,
outwardly has a lot of populist cool, and then, but in
yeah.
terms of inner party and actual action, does none of it.
She was saying things that looked good when I was looking at her, but it's never a case of just what they're saying. Same thing with Vivek, right? He says a lot of very base things, but you got to be careful because maybe he is, if Maloney was that, as you're suggesting, maybe Vivek is that too. We can't stop demanding better. We were very, very lucky. And maybe this is the thing. Maybe this is the one thing that breaks the cycle that you're talking about here. Very lucky that Trump got into power and actually seemed to be trying to do what he said he was doing, what he said he wanted to do, and got some things done. And that he's actually, I think, got more convinced of them, more confident since then. We know it can be done. We know that not every opposition or not every member of our group is controlled opposition. We know it can be done. Just to keep pushing harder for it. The risk, of course, and I do mention this, I mentioned it several times on many things, that you can't be too predictable in anything. If all the opponent has to do is say that one's a Nazi, and the right will say, no, she's just based, and then go support her, that's not a good idea. It's the same thing with the arguments we were talking about with Dev earlier. If you jump in with the arguments that are in fact not the right arguments to make, it actually just strengthens him. You can't let yourself be too predictable. You can't let yourself be manipulated by the opponent, even if it doesn't look like they're trying to manipulate you.
There's also a bit of that in that sometimes what people will do is they'll come in and they'll fill a space with the wrong argument deliberately.
It's like the idea of the conspiracy theorists, and the conspiracy theory is all nuts. Look at these flat earthers and these anti-vaxxers and all this stuff, where actually the real conspiracies are happening and very important and dangerous.
This is why, I don't know, I'm going to stand, this is why I hate all the stuff about aliens. Like, I hate it. I hate it with a passion because it's such, like, brain rot. It's such nonsense in many ways. There's really nothing to it. There's nothing solid there. There's nothing that can really be said either way. But it really interests people. And the problem is, and I spoke about this on Twitter, is that with the US government talking seriously about aliens and the US media talking about aliens and parts of the right-wing press talking seriously about aliens, is that aliens becomes a topic that is as real to people as the Epstein Island is. But the problem is that Epstein Island also becomes as fake to people as aliens are.
Yeah.
And if you start repeating a lot of this stuff in a fashion like it's true, then the news becomes even more like a TV show to people. I saw someone in. Have you heard of Unheard, which is
I don't think so.
The latest of the based mainstream press in quotes. I'm not a big fan of theirs. They're also just controlled by the same Conservative Party money as everyone else is. But they've been putting out articles in this. They put out articles about Epstein. The very real stuff with Epstein, next to articles that treat UFO stuff like it's real. And the two will be next to each other. And I'm just like, that is how you completely discredit any of this. That's how you get people to just see things like Epstein as, oh, look, it's more tabloid stuff. It's like Epstein being next to, oh, my mum had sex with the Wolfman and stuff, daily sports stuff. Yeah. And I find that very alarming. We call it conspiracy jacketing. And there's a lot of that. And there's also in the UK something I referred to as the kook sphere, which is like David Icke and all those people. And what they do is they ruin, some of it deliberately, I believe, but they ruin a lot of the revelatory news that can come out that is genuinely true. And there's very good documented evidence of it. Like Epstein's a good example of it. Epstein's just a meme now. It's a joke. It's a conspiracy. It's something the news talks about, then goes on to talk about aliens. And I find that very disheartening in certain.
Yeah, and it does that too. As I said, I think a lot of this stuff, we probably agree, does beckon for a new paradigm of news dissemination. That I think is where, like I've said, the vanguard of the culture war is the press. Even if it's not the root of it, it is the vanguard of it. You get rid of that, the whole thing might come crumbling down. And again, slowly, but we are seeing change. There's alternative sites for information, which are gradually gaining steam.